Translating the construct relationship. In this module, we'll look at how exactly to translate these nouns that are in a construct relationship with one another. And really what we're dealing with here are genitives. If you've taken Greek, especially beyond the first year Greek exegesis or something like that, as an ancient Greek, then you will have encountered genitives. And if you've taken Latin as well, and you'll encounter many of them, 15 or some odd different types of genitives. I'm going to give you 6 here. Now all of these can, you could translate it with of, the English word of. So you have your construct, you have of, and then you have your absolute. And it will work after a fashion. But it's usually not the best way to translate it. It shows that you're not really understanding what's going on, or in some cases it really doesn't work very well at all. So I want to show you what these 6 are, and then we'll summarize it at the end. So the first is possession, and I think we already dealt with some examples of this. This is the most basic form of it's really the most basic way we think of genitives. We think of genitives as something possessing or owning. And what happens here is the genitive or the absolute, which is this one here, right? The genitive or the absolute is the owner or the possessor of the construct. So here we have Beit HaMelech. If I translate this with of, it would be the house of the king. But really what we're talking about is the king's house, right? The king owns or possesses the house. Okay, let's look at another possibility. We also have something called source or authorship. And here, well, let me bring up the examples before I talk about it. We have Devar Adonai, okay, the word of the Lord. Literal translation with of, using of. But it's not that the Lord owns or possesses the word. In a sense he does. But really a more accurate description of this relationship is that he is the source or the author of the word. He's saying it, or he's causing it to be said through a prophet. So it's more like the word from the Lord. Now in English you could, in fact you would probably say the word of the Lord, but what we're talking about here really is authorship. So what we mean when we're talking about translating these construct relationships, or these different types of genitives, genitive of possession we just dealt with, or here genitive of source or authorship, is not really so much translating, it's more meaning. Because you may in fact use of, but if you think about what the meaning is, then you'll understand, or I guess you will be articulating more clearly what's really going on in the sentence. Now all of these as well really should be done in the context of a sentence. It's pretty hard to figure out a genitive just with 2 words. These words have been chosen rather carefully as examples that are typically of these types, but they should be done in a sentence, because the rest of the sentence will lead you one way or another. So this is source or authorship, where the genitive or the absolute, here's the genitive or the absolute right here, is the source or the author of the construct. Okay, next one, I'm going to deal with 2 here now, subjective genitive and objective genitive, because they kind of work together. The subjective genitive, I'll give an example here, chesed. Chesed is loyal love or covenantal love, and Elohim is God, of course. So the loyal love of God, or God's loyal love. What the subjective genitive is when the genitive or the absolute is the subject of the construct. In other words, the subject, the genitive or the absolute, is doing the construct. So subjective genitives and also objective genitives really are only applicable when the word here in the construct has a verbal form as well. Chesed is sort of like a verbal noun. It's a noun, but there is a verb counterpart to it. If you had mountain here, har, it wouldn't make sense. You couldn't talk about a subjective genitive with a noun that you can't make a verb out of it. You can't mountain something. But love, you can also love. You can have love as a noun, which is what's going on here, or you can love. Fear is something that can be a noun, fear of something, or it can be a verb, you can fear. So subjective and objective genitives work with nouns that have a verb counterpart to them. And the subjective is when the absolute, or the genitive, this one here, sorry, is the subject. This is doing that. Objective genitive is just the opposite. Objective genitive is, well, let's read the example here. Yirat Adonai, fear of the Lord. What's happening with the objective genitive is when the genitive, or the absolute, is the object, hence the name. Maybe I should even make this arrow the other way. Is the object of, this is the object of the construct. See, in the previous one we had loyal love here, the love of God. And what we're talking about is God doing the loving. In this case, it's not God doing the fearing, it's other people who are fearing God, fearing the Lord. So objective genitive, the genitive is the object. Subjective genitive, the genitive is the subject. Now these are something that you really want to pay attention to the context, because often you don't know just by itself. Love of God, what is that? Is that something that comes from God, or is it something we do towards God? So these are really syntactical and semantic questions, not questions that relate to just these two words by themselves. But what I want to do here is give you the categories to make you aware that there's different ways to think about these genitives. They mean different things, really. And to give you the handles, too, to give you these terms so that you're exposed to them. Okay, subjective and objective genitive. Attribute. Now, attribute, I'll give you the example here. Har HaKodesh. Har is mountain, Kodesh is holy. Attribute simply means that the genitive, or the absolute, is functioning like an attributive adjective. So it is modifying the construct. Okay? Hence the name attribute, close to attributive. Now, this is not really the mountain of holiness. It's the holy mountain. Mountain of holiness really doesn't even work in English. To translate it of here doesn't really get the sense. It's the holy mountain. And this form here, this form of the genitive, the attributive form, or the genitive of attribute, I suppose you'd call it, is typically occurs when the genitive, or the absolute, is an abstract noun, like holy. So be on the lookout for abstract nouns. When you see those, then when you see them in a construct relationship like this, you'll probably need to use them as an adjective. They modify this, holy mountain. Another example I think is maybe a bit clearer is Brit Olam. Brit is covenant, Olam is eternity, or that's one way to translate it. So you wouldn't say the covenant of eternity, or a covenant of eternity. It would be eternal covenant. So again, this is modifying this. And Olam is an abstract noun, so eternal covenant is much better than covenant of eternity. Now the last example is material, and this I alluded to earlier. I didn't give you the Hebrew, but I just talked about it in English. Kaseh Zahav. So here we have throne, and here we have gold. And this is, what happens here is that the genitive, or the absolute, explains the material of the construct, explains what it's made of. So this is a golden throne. Now really, if you think about it, this is a subset of what we just dealt with, the attributive. If you had holy here, and you had, what did we have here? Mountain. We had holy mountain, or eternal covenant. This Zahav here is really functioning as an attribute as well, but it's more specific. It's an attribute that specifically talks about material. And I guess there are enough cases of that grammarians felt necessary to make a new category. So this is telling you what this is made of. So what I would do here is I would learn what these categories are, be familiar with how they're used, but really it's only in context that you're going to be able to practice them. So let's just review them again briefly, what the labels are. Possession, that's where the genitive, or the absolute, possesses or owns the construct. Source or authorship, where the genitive or the absolute is the source or the author, like the Lord's, the word of the Lord, where the Lord is speaking the word. Subjective genitive and objective genitive, these occur when the construct is a verbal noun, a noun that has a verb counterpart to it, and subjective means that the absolute or the genitive is the subject, so the absolute is doing the action. In the objective genitive, the absolute is receiving the action. Is the object of the action. So you are fearing the Lord. Fear of the Lord means someone else is fearing the Lord. Attribute, just like an attributive, where the absolute is functioning as an attributive, holy mountain, or eternal covenant. And material, lastly, which is really just a subset of attribute that is explaining what something is made out of. So, here are 6 genitives. And it's useful to know that the construct, if you translate with of, be careful. Think about these things. Run through the list. There may, in fact, be a better way to translate it, or even if you translate it with of, a better way to think about what's actually going on in the construct relationship.